Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast where the team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me this week we have Cameron Abbott. How you doing, Cameron?
Hey, what's going on, nerds?
What is going on? I actually have
Oh yeah.
Dad's root beer on my end that I could have popped open, I suppose. Thank you to my aunt for an early Christmas gift there, even though now it's after Christmas. We also are joined by Frank Bazzani. How you doing, Frank?
Good.
Good. You guys have a good holiday in your necks of the woods?
I do. I did it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a great time.
Excellent.
Yeah, for sure.
My family did a Christmas Eve dinner instead of a Christmas Day dinner
Okay.
because yeah, and it was a nice little family get together. Small group of people. You know, my one of my siblings lives out of state, and so without her family, we're kind of like roughly around 10 of us, and give or take, like an infant or two. So not infinite, but like toddler or two.
Mhm.
So overall, like very small gathering, but like it was a very good one. Great food, great time. We did prime rib. It was awesome.
Nice. And Frank, I know you originally had planned on coming out here, but obviously COVID
Yeah.
kind of prevented that. So how was your were you able to still like get a hold of your folks and do any kind of like Zoom Christmas, or just kind of celebrate on your own?
I just kind of did my own thing. Like I did talk to them, of course, like especially early in the morning. But then I kept it small, but just like one or two friends from over here came over, and we just watched movies all day primarily. So it was pretty chill. Like it was a pretty relaxing day, all things considered.
Nice. Yeah, on my end of things, we my sister and brother-in-law and I met up at my parents' house, and kind of did a like out on the back patio. We did like socially distanced celebration. My aunt had stayed over at my mom and dad's house, so the six of us basically just kind of had a little celebration. My aunt got me this Disney Mickey Mouse
Oh, nice.
sweatshirt, so I was like,
Nice.
nice little get to love some Disneyland. I also got like a cool little Disneyland history book from my folks, in addition to a handful of other things. Lots of gift cards because that was basically what I asked for. But yeah, it was good getting to see them. We basically opened a few presents and caught up, and then basically like took the rest of our gifts home to open in the like safety of our own homes and stuff. But yeah, it was really nice getting to see everybody, and just kind of celebrate the day as best we could, all things considered. To any of our listeners out there, we hope you had a safe and healthy holiday as well. If you enjoy what you hear, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review the podcast everywhere you can. If you're feeling extra generous, you can always support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. This episode is going to be pretty much just Wonder Woman. We're going to do kind of our Wonder Woman 84 impressions. Wonder Woman 1984, technically, I believe is the official title. Obviously, it was one of the two big films that kind of got their digital release on Christmas Day, the other one being Soul, which I think is probably going to be the focus of this week's That D Plus show. So if you want to hear some thoughts on that, feel free to hop over and check out that episode later in the week. But yeah, Wonder Woman 84, we all watched, and certainly this seems like a somewhat divisive movie online based on the Twitter impressions
Uh,
I've been seeing. I've seen people like really, really love it and really, really high on it, and I've seen people really, really hate it and really, really down on it. So,
yeah.
and I think I ultimately fall somewhere way in the middle of that. And
Mm.
that hasn't been like great fodder for like tweets or anything like that. So I just haven't even bothered like putting any thoughts out there online. I figured we've got a podcast. I figured I would talk about it there. So yeah, we're gonna do kind of what we usually do on Spoilercasty episodes, where we'll talk kind of spoiler-free impressions first, and then I'll do a very clear demarcation in the show notes of like this is when we're gonna dive into Spoilerland. So spoiler-free thoughts at first. Cameron, let me kick it over to you first, because yours were some of the first impressions I saw, at least on Twitter,
Yeah.
in terms of the movie in general. And I think were certainly less, hostile towards it than some of the other ones I'd seen. So,
Yeah.
so what were your kind of spoiler-free impressions of Wonder Woman 84?
Spoiler-free impressions, I'd have to say that be prepared for this movie being extremely comic booky.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably the most comic booky, like graphic novel esque film DC's put out in their universe, in their cinematic universe, I should say. Outside of maybe Spider-Man, uh, outside of the Spider-Verse, I think it's the most comic booky movie that I've seen, superhero wise, anyway. Um,
What do you mean by what
yeah.
do you mean by that when you say kind of the most comic booky?
There are the way that this film is structured is in a fashion and a way that you would expect that the scenes that are playing out are played out not um in a kind of what you would expect out of a cinematic order, but rather are done in a very comic book wise order.
Okay.
Certain revelations happen, certain scenes occur that otherwise don't, like cinematography, like in a traditional movie sense, you wouldn't, and direction wise, you wouldn't say, well, I would want to put this scene here for this purpose and then put this scene here for this purpose, because you would want for example, Max Lord's reveal, so to speak, of like his intentions not being entirely pure is revealed almost immediately after his introduction into the show, into the film proper. Uh, it's very like it happens in a way like he's present in the like his first presence is seen in that television commercial at a mall that happened, like it's playing on all these TVs that just so happens to be where Wonder Woman is doing some like crime saving stuff. And it all happens to be tied to like the way that things are tied together are much more that you'd find in like a graphic novel than you'd find in like a traditional screenplay. That's what I mean
Okay.
when I say a film's very comic booky, which is not uncommon. A lot of times, a lot of these more comic book graphic novel elements or esque elements are put together in a superhero film to kind of tie in the superhero-ness of it. Um, for example, I think a very common complaint for why you have a show like Daredevil is, well, if it's this much of a problem, why wouldn't the Avengers just get called in to come save the day? And it's like, well, if you think about it in the aspect of the world, like to get this to tie into it, like why you don't call the Avengers for everything is because you don't need a nuclear threat level response for neighborhood crime. It's kind of like the idea of that, and that's a very comic book based idea. When in a film aspect, that wouldn't really be your take on it. So that's a rough like comparison to make for it, but I find that like that explanation that people give for that is a very much a comic book explanation versus what people would expect out of like a traditional film or television show.
Okay.
Because it's like,
Frank.
well, why they go around in this convoluted way? It's like, well, it makes sense if you think about it like a comic book is kind of
Okay.
the idea.
Frank, start over to you. What were your thoughts?
I did like it. I definitely. It's not like I'm kind of. I think more similar to you and how you feel about it, where I'm kind of like middle of the road. Like I liked it, but it's like I didn't hate it. It's not a bad movie, but I don't like love it. It's not like particularly great, especially even just as like a superhero movie or a comic book movie. I went in, I think, with really low expectations. The fact that like that this is just like a DC movie or like it's part of the DCEU, and like I always hold like really low expectations for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it's still at the top tier or like the higher end for me of like DC movies I've seen, but in the grand scheme of things, like
Such a
That's
low
I don't
bar.
that's
think it's a
that's
particularly
yeah,
yeah.
grading on a curve. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And especially because I will say, and this is for me in particular, like I watched the first Wonder Woman like in tandem with this for the first time, and like I do think that is a much better movie, and I think they handle Wonder Woman much better in that movie. And I
Mm-hmm.
was just like, so it was kind of weird to me how some of the things they even did right kind of fall apart. But I mean, that's just my takeaway at least.
Yeah.
I
I
think
think.
just to kind of like sum up my thoughts, um, like first hour and a half of this movie is actually like really, really, really good. But like Wonder Woman, the first one, it falls apart really badly in its third act. So
It's we'll get into that a little bit more in spoiler stuff because that's certainly a criticism I've seen a lot as well, and I'm actually intrigued by the third act of this one certainly more than the original Wonder Woman because I
mm-hmm.
think it is it is almost a direct response to a lot of the criticisms that we see often from like Superman movies or Batman or the Avengers and MCU stuff as kind of their approach to third acts. You know, always being like punch harder or just defeat the big blue thing in the sky or whatever. I thought the kind of the way that Wonder Woman ends is more fitting with Wonder Woman as a character, at least the Wonder Woman that they're setting up as a character, than a punch harder kind of like ending. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. For me, like at the end of the day, I think my biggest thing on the movie is I feel like I could cut an hour of the movie and not lose anything. And that's like the tweet that I had, you know, in drafts or something was basically like, as somebody who, especially for like our holiday kind of month of D plus, I've been watching a lot of like 90-minute movies. The extra hour that this movie has, being like 2 hours and 40 minutes, really felt long. And there's just some stuff that I feel like just entire sequences that you could lose, and they don't really add or add anything to the kind of the core movie outside of like, oh, that's a cool sequence. Um, I think it has some really cool Wonder Woman moments that are
Mm-hmm.
some of the coolest moments we've seen in of the character in certainly in you know recent years, but maybe even in live action as a whole. And then there's obviously some great little fan servicey moments as well. But yeah, then there is a lot of bloat to it. I think it kind of suffers a lot of the same issues that we see a lot of superhero movies suffer, in that like they throw in maybe one too many villains or storylines or something like that. Like if you'd focused on maybe two of the three big kind of arcs of the movie, I think it might have made for a better story. But the fact that there's like a third storyline in there as well, kind of, and they I think they do an interesting job of like interweaving all three storylines and kind of keeping the
Yeah.
momentum of each one moving along, but it still feels too much. And I think could have benefited from some tightening up. Um, the like I don't think they really did as much with the 80s aesthetic as they could have, outside of like, oh, there's a lot of pastels. But like even like they don't even really go like crazy on like the 80s music. Like there's a couple songs,
Yeah.
but it's like not really like super like memorable or notice, like it's for a movie that like tries to be nostalgic of the 80s or whatever. It's not really trying to be nostalgic of the 80s. It's just kind of like setting the characters in the 80s, and it's got more nostalgia for the Cold War kind of thing than anything else, really, I guess.
Yeah,
Um,
which is not really what people want to remember about the 80s. I
yeah,
will
certainly.
say
Yeah.
that the biggest mistake this film might have when it comes to its like music and soundtrack is having Hans Zimmer, which is a weird thing to say. But
Mm,
like if they wanted to embrace the quote unquote 80s aspect of the film, have a couple of the like the bang Hans Zimmer tracks for the cool Wonder Woman scenes, sure. But for like other stuff, like there was no awesome moment of like they didn't use anything like Top Gun esque or anything like that during the jet scene or anything like that. Well, that's kind of like not really a spoiler, but still, like there's so much they could have done that would have made this film more based in the 80s, outside of just like a very light 80s aesthetic and like 80s geopolitics. Um,
yeah.
that like is weird, but also like the 80s geopolitics they used are like the absolute number one worst 80s film tropes. Like they chose
A
the
little bit, yeah.
worst of them. Like the
Hmm.
absolute garbage tier level tropes for this And I think the biggest thing that you can reckon this, like you can hang the hat on of like where this goes to is in the first Wonder Woman film, it was co-written. I forgot his name, but it was co-written by Jeff Johns and somebody else. This film is only screenplay written by Jeff Johns. The announcement they made today or yesterday, Wonder Woman 3 will be written and directed by Patty Jenkins. I think says a lot about where I think there's where to hang, like where I hang the blame hat on is definitely in the screenplay department on this film.
Okay. Because
So
I mean,
that's
like,
my
because she
feeling on
did.
it.
So, like, yeah. So, she worked on the story as well of this one. Like, the credited writers are Patty Jenkins and Jeff Johns for story by, and screenplay actually was Dave Callahan. Callaham.
I thought I was
Yeah, and well, Jeff Johns and Dave Callaham did the screenplay. So Jeff Johns
for this one
was involved on it as well. Yeah.
Okay. I thought that's weird because in the credits last night they only had Jeff Johns in the credits for screenplay by.
I mean, was it like because it's written and directed by Patty Jenkins, so that's probably. But yeah, I mean that's what IMDb says at least. Yeah, it's like I'm not even gonna point the finger at like a screenplay issue compared to a story issue compared to a performance. Like the performances that are in there, I really enjoyed.
I think
like,
the performances were excellent all around the board.
Yeah, Gal
I thought
Gadot
Pedro
and
Pascal was great too.
yeah, exactly. Gal Gadot and Chris Pine have the great chemistry that everybody loved from the first movie, and that gets brought back, I think, at least in an interesting enough way. The Pedro Pascal in particular, hot off the Mandalorian. Like, I love getting to see more of him, and I think he does. You know, he has a few fun layers that he gets to play with in this.
Yeah.
And then Kristen Wiig was really the one I was most concerned about because I really have never connected with her from her work on SNL. Like, she is very much a like in the SNL like lexicon. There's like hit or miss character performers and stuff, and she is very much a miss for me.
Oh, really?
But like, I really enjoyed her here,
I loved her
especially
here.
when she starts kind of making the turn. Like she does a good job setting herself up as like the goofy Barbara Minerva, so that like the cheetah that we get by the end of the movie certainly is a very stark contrast to that. So yeah, like I was surprised by the fact that I wasn't put off by her in that role. Because I just don't connect with a lot of her characters from SNL and stuff.
Oh, I love her. I absolutely.
I think she, from what I understand, like the stuff she's done outside of SNL, where she does get more serious and stuff, probably would probably be more up my alley. But yeah, this was like that was the big kind of like thing I was concerned about going into this. So really, yeah, like all the performances across the board, I enjoyed all of them. I enjoyed what they all brought to the table. And yeah, it was just, again, my biggest things come down to like it just kind of felt bloated, and I think more focus would have really helped out for some of my biggest issues. But yeah, let's go ahead and I will throw the timestamp up here. Let's go ahead and dive into spoiler talk. Anything in particular, Cam? I guess like talking about the third act, really.
Yeah.
We can dive into that first if you want.
Sure. Everything after Egypt is just a straight run down the hill, as in terms of like anything interesting. Like the climax of the film should be something you're excited about, but when you make the climax an hour long sequence of just busy travel and moving around, and like Pedro Pascal is so incredible, but he could not get me to understand what Max Lord's actual motivations were outside of them changing moment to moment.
I mean, he always wants more. He wants
He,
it all, and because of the monkey's paw nature of his like wish slash curse, he has to keep going for more, and he has to keep like yeah that the fact that he goes to as many stops as he goes to kind of along his like end game journey. I was like, yeah, you could have cut out like 2 or 3 of these and really just like streamlined that whole thing. The fact that it is like he goes to like the oil barons in Egypt, and then he goes to the president, and then to like the world through TV or whatever. It's like,
yeah,
okay, like
it's
did
it's
we need the side trip in Egypt really at
yeah.
all?
My biggest, like the biggest problem that I have is the one thing they should have done to make that more clear, because at some point I was like, oh, if he doesn't stop, like keep granting wishes, he'll like he dies, right? Is that what's happening? He's bleeding and stuff and whatnot. And it, or I'm like, or is it he like, because it's happening after he grants the wishes? Is it happening like, is it the more he grants wishes, the more it kills him? But like, I'm like, is this a question of like addiction? Is this a question of like the nature of power? Like, I'm trying to figure this out about what his like what is going on here, but they're mixing the they're giving him like weird signs of like what is the downside of his power, to the point where like I'm so confused about, like, he's in pain clearly, so he wants to grant all these wishes all at once so that he will like, or he wants to just be left alone because he says, I want, like, I'm going to go to the president and I'm going to say like, you like everybody has to leave me alone. I'm like, oh, okay. And then he's like, oh, but here we go now. And I'm like, I don't know what
So
like like your end goal.
So
I'm missing it.
Yeah, it wasn't everybody has to leave me alone in terms of like stop bugging me or whatever. It was leave me alone so that like I'm not getting like FBI looking into my finances or any of that kind of stuff. It was like
Like he's like a foreign nation
act
now.
let me act with impunity basically. Let me be a president or whatever.
Because
It was
before he
like
goes
him
there,
wanting more power basically in that moment.
In that moment, sure,
Um,
but
and because
he goes to the president because they're like, he's being bombarded with requests from people. And he's like, I can't deal with all these people around me and all these requests. Like, that's the scene right before he goes to the president. And I'm like, if it was like, oh, he, like, the FBI is on line 1, the FCC is on line 2, and he's like, oh, shoot. And so he goes to the president
Yeah.
to get that, then sure. But instead it's like, your son is here, and these people want interviews, and you want, like, all these wishes that you're wanting to be granting, and, like, you have something going on with your health. And I'm like,
No, it was
there's
so
much going on here.
he wasn't able to so the whole monkey's paw nature of the thing is it takes away your greatest asset or whatever, like in exchange. So that's why Diana loses her powers, and that's why Barbara loses her humanity. So he's losing his health, and as the wishmaker, he's kind of made the condition when he grants a wish, he basically takes something in return from the people, and that being life force, but doing it one person at a time is not stemming the tide. So he's kind of the understanding, like, oh, if I can reach more people at once, if, like, when he talks to the pastor, he's like, can you have everybody hold hands, would that work? And he's thinking it out in his head basically, like, if I'm holding hands and there's like a chain of people, am I granting all of their wishes at once? Am I touching all these people at once? So that's why he latches on to the idea of like, oh, this particle technology or whatever is touching everybody, so he can make all those wishes, and then it basically says like, I will give you whatever you want, and in return I will steal your life force or whatever, and so that's what's going to keep him alive and keep himself immortal basically. So it's
But
my take was it was the obviously, like, he can't keep up with the curse. He thought he could beat the curse, but the curse had other plans, and so he's having to try and outthink it kind of constantly throughout his end game, to the point of, yeah, he wants to have everybody make their wishes at once.
It was poorly
Yeah, it's
poorly executed on. Like the scenes
It's
are done very well, and I can see where you came away with that. But I'm just like missing. Like I'm just sitting here, just like But also they don't make very clear what like the
it is a
for
much more abstract, like
yeah.
MacGuffin-esque kind of thing than we're used to seeing in a superhero film.
In
So
anything
I
outside of
even
like a
wonder if that was
children's
like what
film.
you were talking about.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
like
I
yeah,
wonder if that
it's
was what you were thinking about when you said like, oh, it's more comic booky than anything.
100%.
Because it
It
yeah.
it more so actually more so it has to do with how do we get Steve back? The Magic Stone grants the wish. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh,
Yeah.
that is 100% like the last panel of a weekly comic issue or a monthly comic issue coming out, and it's like Steve Rogers waking up in another person's body after Diana makes the wish is like the last panel on that month's issue. Like
Steve Trevor.
yeah,
We're
Steve Trevor.
crossing over
Did I call Steve
crossing
Rogers?
the
My bad.
timelines.
See,
Yeah, yeah.
here's the problem in the back of my head. It can't be Steve Trevor because your name's Trevor, and that's what's
Right,
happening.
yeah. That's I love seeing her in front of like the Trevor Ranch. I'm like, yeah, that's right. Go hang out at the Trevor Ranch for whatever.
Also, when he
Like
sees that
her
photo, and
photos collection was weird. Yeah.
oh well, for me, it's like when
Um,
he realizes he goes, "Oh shoot, she has never moved past me. That's not
yeah.
okay."
That's like yeah.
She
That was
went to my parents' ranch. We knew each other for like 2 weeks, Diana. You can't be going visiting my parents after I died.
yeah. It was there was a lot of like the fact that yeah she's been hung up on it for 70 years. It's like
That's not healthy.
it's almost like there's a crude joke out there of like that must be some good D
But they
if
never
it
had
could do
sex
that to Wonder Woman.
before he died. That's why the first thing
I think that no, they
did they have sex?
Oh,
Oh,
they
they
did.
did. That's
Yeah,
right. They do
they
have
do
sex.
the
No, I
night
just
out.
I watched the movie. They
Yeah,
did.
Yeah,
okay.
the night after No Man's Land.
Oh, that's
Um,
right. They do bone.
yeah, it's
That
but
must have been some like. But here's the thing:
but
the moment she gets back to life, the first thing they do is they just go to town.
yep. But yeah,
Respect.
it like it was an interesting way to bring them back, and you know I of the three threads, that's the one I wouldn't want cut. Like I liked getting to explore, especially a reversal of the dynamic of the first movie was him introducing her to the world, and this one it has a little bit of her introducing him to the world because the 80s are crazy, and like that's where some of the funnest moments are for
Yeah,
me
for
certainly
sure.
in the movie of Chris Pine just trying on a whole bunch of clothes, but even that isn't like they didn't feel like they went far enough into like the 80s ness of it.
Well, when they went
Um,
to NASA, the NASA museum in Washington, and like he's
it's the Smithsonian Air and Space,
yeah,
yeah.
thank you. Um, when they went to that, and he's like freaking out because he's like, we went to space, and I love it because he's
hmm
like looking at the planes and stuff, and he goes, man, I want to, and then she goes, oh yeah, like you can ride him. He goes, I don't want to ride in them, I want to fly it. And it's like, yes, like he's like, it's like he's like he is still the pilot boy we met in the first film at his heart. Um, and he has this open wide wonder at the most. Like it's funny because he had like that kind of like big open wide or eyes open wide deer in the headlights type feeling when he was on Themyscira in the first
hmm
film, and now in the future he's having that same look. Chris Pine, I just think, does such an amazing job as Steve Trevor. He is still such an important heart to the Wonder Woman story in a way that I think in a lot of Wonder Woman media, Steve Trevor is kind of like added on like the Ken doll accessory. Um, and in both these films, he's been able to be an equal to Diana at the same time as understanding that she is so powerful and so
hmm
like it like the way they are able to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses and give each other that extra advantage edgewise when it comes to like the fight scene in the White House when she's losing her powers like fat more and more, and he's trying to make up for it. Like uses the serving tray to block like to block some bullets to get them out of there. helping her guard, like having her back, even though like because before she didn't need it, but now she does, and he immediately picks up on that and picks up the pace on making sure he's helping her out. Is just such a
Yeah.
great thing. What's sad and really sad about it is Kristen Wiig's performance as Barbara is very good. Like it's incredible. To take a character like Cheetah and play her into and get her, because she is the quote unquote like iconic rival to Wonder Woman. She's been replaced, I think, in a lot of like modern media in the form of Ares and more tying into her Greek background. But in the during her longest run, Cheetah was much more of the standard villain for her, as her like her Joker-esque rival. And like Kristen Wiig as Barbara is so good because I love the very beginning of their friendship, where
Mm-hmm.
it's Diana immediately picks up on. She's like, "You're funny, you're personable, you're charming, you're like you." She's like, "I've never met a funnier person than you." Like it very much is like this budding friendship of like Diana knows that she's the world sees her as gorgeous and beautiful and whatnot, but it doesn't matter to her because the things that she finds to be good and the things that she wishes she had were these more funny aspects that Barbara shows. This wonderful um, ability to just like to find something that can make her laugh, and then and it's just it's a wonderful friendship between the two that gets started, and I like that they never get, and this is pardon my pun on this, but they never get catty about it. It never,
Right. Yeah. Like
yeah,
it gets introduced as like, oh yeah, this could turn into a single white female type situation, and it. I mean, obviously, her wish is to become Diana, so it kind of is. But like in more of a comic booky kind of tone and
yeah.
feel, certainly, yeah. I think
Their
if
relationship is
if
never
her
questioned,
if
I
she
think.
hadn't just seen that sense of like jealousy of like wanting to be that other person, they could have been great friends. And even like to the end, like Diana again going to the end of things, like the fact that Diana like wants her and everybody else to renounce their wish rather than like punch through it or whatever,
Yeah,
or just defeat Max like she could at that point. Um, is again, I think that's a an interesting approach that I think I'm seeing a lot of people like really hate the ending of it, but I
I
thought
like
like
that aspect
it
of it.
is the opposite of a like Superman punch harder ending. The fact that she doesn't like defeat Max by fighting him is cool. She is like defeating him with compassion, with kindness, trying to open his eyes up to the truth, all that stuff. Um,
Oh, can we actually? I
Frank,
need
real
to
quick.
before we pass over. I just also need to say I know plot wise why it was introduced, but the throat being able to quote unquote show people the truth being introduced now, several films into like what we've seen of Wonder Woman is a first off wild, like that power is wild,
I,
and also
I
like when I say comic booky, I mean like this. It's introduced once to show a cool flashback for this armor, and
mhm.
it's done to introduce the armor as well as this power because both are used as the mechanisms by which Diana solves the problem that she's confronted with. The armor allows her to take on Cheetah, and then the lasso's truth seeing ability lets her allows her like gives her the advantage to get Max to renounce his wish. So and through him and by through him reaching out and showing the truth to the entire world, which
Yeah.
yeah,
It's again, it is a very aspirational ending, which doesn't at all
I
jive with like the rest of the world that we have seen since. But whatever.
I will
Frank, I
say
want to throw it to you. What were
oh
your
sorry, go
what
ahead.
were some of your thoughts on the ending here?
I definitely didn't mind it because especially kind of like for the reasons you're saying, where it's not just like a skate better, punch harder ending. It is definitely like they put a little bit more in there, and like I kind of like I get the message they're going for, right? Like everybody sort of bands together and realizes like it's not about being selfish and like the thing I want. It's about like everybody just kind of if we all work together, we can save the world or whatever. Like it's like I get what they're going for, and it's just kind of like a nice message. The biggest thing that kind of bothered me about it is it kind of leaves you a little bit with that thing of like, well, then like basically the entire movie didn't take place because everybody like reverses their wishes, so everybody's back to square one. And then my biggest thing that kind of bothered me about it a little bit is that like Max doesn't even go to jail or anything. Like Max is just like perfectly healthy again and he just gets to go be with his kid or whatever. And that was the part to me at least. Like I get that's like the end of his story and he gets to be his family and he's going to be a good dad now, but I was like, do you get to do that? Like you did a lot. Like aren't people dead like because of what you did? Like
Yeah, that was really like one of the things I immediately started to like poke holes at of like that, like, oh, if everybody renounces their wish. I'm like, we saw somebody wish their partner dead like in the middle of a fight, and that other person who is now dead also like made a wish. That dead person can't renounce their wish. Like, yeah, you can renounce that you didn't want them dead, but like, can they come back from that? Like, what is the logic of that? That kind of like, that's where a lot of that, like, again, it is this like much bigger idea than I think they could really execute on effectively here in the film. But I appreciated that they really swung for the fences with it, even if it didn't hit. It was it I appreciated the effort as opposed to just like let's just have it be another fisticuffs fight. I think that was obviously one of the big complaints that people had of the original Wonder Woman was like the end fight against Ares is just like Diana learns how to punch harder or whatever, which also like Diana learns how to fly in that, so the fact that she like hasn't flown for 70 years or whatever was a whole other thing.
Well, she learns how to ride lightning in the first one.
Yeah,
like
okay.
she learns how to like lasso lightning and like ride the lightning, so to speak.
Yeah.
And in this one, she learns how to ride the winds.
Sure. I want to talk about going back to the beginning of the movie, the Themyscira stuff. What did you guys think of the Themyscira stuff? Because for me, that is immediately one of the things I would just immediately cut. I feel like that even the mall intro scene that happens afterwards, like I was like, I
didn't
feel
like that either.
You could cut both of those sequences, and you're not gonna like, especially like I rewatched the opening, and the mall sequence is supposed to set up that like, oh, the jewelry store was like a black market shop, and sure they give you like a focused shot on the Dreamstone there, but like we don't know what the Dreamstone is at that point. We can't even like there's so much other stuff in that scene that you don't even know that's the thing that I'm supposed to be focusing on until you've seen the movie and oh, that's the thing that you're supposed to be focusing on. So yeah, like I feel like you could cut out the first 25 minutes or whatever that is of this movie, and you're not going to lose too much out of the core central story. That said, like the Themyscira stuff, I think you just could cut entirely. No, like it didn't really add anything to the movie for me.
It doesn't do anything even in the plot or anything.
Yeah, because
it doesn't even come back. It's not foreshadowing anything.
She echoes the thing that she was told at the very end to Max.
Heroes aren't made off. Heroes can't be made from non-truths or whatever. Like lies, whatever her thing is there, like that certainly comes back in. But like that is a line in that sequence, whereas like the much bigger theme of that sequence seems to be don't take shortcuts, Diana. And also like, hey, the rules of that race weren't set up appropriately. So like it's presented that, oh, little Diana has, she's overcome this, this obstacle she faced and she's back in it and she's, she like, we should be cheering for her. And then she's literally pulled out of the race, yanked out of it and told like, no, you cheated. It's like, you took the short path. It's like, how did they know she took the short path?
Oh, it's because she didn't. She missed two of the checkpoints.
She missed one of the checkpoints.
Or one of the checkpoints.
Like she didn't. But like they don't know that she had to take a shortcut through the the very conveniently placed like grating.
I don't think they. I don't think they
So
thought
like
that. I think they thought that she just like cut through instead and took a shortcut.
right, but like they don't know that, but they like that is the assumption that gets made or whatever. And it's like realistically, it's like she could have just missed, and like admittedly that would have been a whole other thing. But whatever, like the whole Themyscira thing, I was just like cool, sure, bring back Robin Wright and the mom, I guess, but like really like it didn't add thematically to the rest of the movie for
Nope.
me. And so it just kind of like it just kind of feels like uh oh, here's an action scene for action scene's sake. That shows again how great the Amazons are. Cool. But yeah, that and then the mall sequence. I as I was watching, I was like, well, I feel like everybody's been complaining, especially as we hear all these rumors about what the next Spider-Man movie is going to be. Everybody's been complaining that Tom Holland didn't get to just be like a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man in New York, and I feel like Diana is just being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man in Wonder Woman. Like that is entirely a Spider-Man sequence, like her swinging around on the lasso and just helping out. Like even going into the mall, her kicking the car out of the way from hitting the runner, or saving the bride or whatever who goes off the bridge. Like she's just doing friendly neighborhood Spider-Man things, but she's Wonder Woman. But yeah, like that whole sequence, I was like, you could cut that too, and I don't think lose anything, especially because again it like goes up to the line of like, hey, let's like look at the 80s stuff and make a commentary on it, but then not really make a commentary on it.
Yep.
Like the closest you get is like some guys looking at the women doing like aerobics in their spandex or something like that. It's like, okay, whatever.
Are you telling us men were
because it's the 80s?
Are you telling us because it was the 80s, men were openly perverts rather than just being closet perverts? Because like we didn't need to know that.
I mean, they're still openly perverts.
Yeah, they're still
stuff,
open perverts. Like they exist.
Yeah. But yeah, like that sequence again, like action for action's sake more than anything. And like, I guess sure, like it attempts to explain away that like, oh, Diana hasn't really been like completely in hiding, like is mentioned in Batman v Superman. She just when she shows up, she takes out security footage of her saving the day. But still, they have a string of like all these crimes that have been stopped by her. I'm pretty sure somebody's going to eventually tell a sketch artist what they saw, and we're like, Wonder Woman is going to start, the myth is going to start growing or whatever. So like, it felt weird. And yeah, I feel like those first two sequences, I was like, you could get rid of them entirely and just jump straight into the movie and the action and stuff. And I feel like probably be a little bit better paced as a result. What did you guys? So one of the big, obviously spoilery things, is that we got to see Wonder Woman's invisible jet introduced in the film.
That was lit.
What did you guys think about that? Frank, what did you think of that sequence?
That was cool. I definitely liked the overall, like the entire sequence. I definitely got like the introduction or the nod of the jet, and I was just like, oh, okay, cool. But I think the larger sequence itself was cool, and especially like the fact that they like fly up above the clouds, and like that was a really cool visual with like all the fireworks underneath, and like it's just a fun moment. And that's when he tells her, the whole wind thing, and like so that comes back later. So that's definitely like a fun thing.
Yeah, I loved. Like I loved that moment where like I put it together. Oh, this is gonna turn into the invisible jet, and that's how they're gonna like get out away from this. And then it turned into that prolonged sequence with the fireworks and stuff, and I was like, I don't know if this is adding to the movie for me or if it's like just feeling overly long. Like it's a cool little visual, and the like it's a thing that I imagine probably would have looked way cooler on the big screen compared to my TV, or God forbid a phone, because like there's so much going on with the fireworks that it's hard to see like where the silhouette of the jet passes through them at times, and so I feel like some of that maybe gets lost on the smaller screen experience, but also it just I didn't know if it really added much to the moment. Like her turning the jet invisible is a great nod to like the history of the character and stuff, and that's one of those moments I think that I kind of alluded to at the top is probably one of the best moments of the film and will be one of like the most iconic Wonder Woman moments out of the live action here is coming up with a kind of in-universe justification of how the jet is invisible, using the power that hid Themyscira to hide this jet. Great. And again, it ties it to Steve's kind of like lineage as a pilot and stuff. Shout out to him for being able to immediately pick up and fly a jet fighter compared to the little pond jumpers that he had in World War I. But yeah, that certainly was a great sequence there. Kim, any thoughts to add on that one?
Yeah, it was awesome. I think that's one of the like great moments is when he's like, okay, once we're off in the air, we're good. And she goes, Steve, you don't know about radar. And he was like, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And at first I was like, no, they had radar. Oh, he was from World War I. They didn't have radar for planes back then. They had radar for submarines. Mm-hmm. And even then, not really. Like Marconi introduced it, like Marconi and Edison introduced it in World War I to the U.S. military. So it's kind of crazy. It's really awesome. And so she's like, oh, I have to make it invisible. And he goes, you can make things invisible? She goes, like my father did it. And he goes, okay. And she goes, and I've done it once before. He goes, oh, okay. On a coffee mug. Uh-huh. Well, I don't know if it actually worked. I never found it again. Great. Let's go.
I think I just lost it.
Yeah, I think I might have just lost it. It's like, let's see if it works. And it works. And it's like, that's a wonderful scene. It does go on for too long. Like, that is a scene that honestly could have been better placed at, like, say, towards the end of the film. Or something like that. Because it is such a special moment between Steve and Diana. And it's emotionally charged. And, like, it's exciting because he's like, okay. And he, like, runs himself through, like, what are the basic things you need to know about how to start up a plane? Like, power, engine, gas engine, on. He's like, here's a big button that says that it turns it on, and then the rest is just picking up speed, taking off, and flying. He's probably really impressed by like all the really cool like navigation instruments that even existed in 1984. That they definitely didn't have in planes back in his day. I think a lot of people don't understand. Oh, we lost Frank.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
We'll get him back.
Yeah, we'll get him back. Oh, here he is. A lot of people don't know that when you signed up to be a pilot in World War I, you were signing your death warrant. Parachutes hadn't really, like, parachutes were still very much like in test phase throughout World War I. When you went up in a plane, the chances of you coming back down on a plane alive were very, very slim.
Yeah, sure. I don't think that really weighs in on this movie. Like, I don't think that's in the back of Steve Trevor's mind as he's flying this or anything.
I was just saying, like, that's the kind of that's the kind of person Steve Trevor would have to be a pilot in World War I. Is incredibly brave and daring and willing to take massive risks because that's what it took to be a pilot. So him doing that in a jet fighter like that is first off awesome. But also, like, it's a really strong, like, character building moment for him. And also, it just like has, like you said, it's super iconic.
Yeah. But then it does, like, what you said of, like, this would have worked, like, better maybe at the end of the movie. I'm like, yeah, because this is them going to Cairo, and then they do the whole sequence in Egypt, and then immediately have to fly back to the States to go meet the guy behind Tower Records.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Not Tower
Records or whatever. Like next to Empire Records store in DC.
Yeah.
I have and also this is like the worst waste of trying to keep keeping Max Lord and Cheetah separate from each other this far into the film was just not good in my opinion. Especially since they totally banged it out in her office earlier in the film. So there's that, and then like her motivations being like, I want to keep my power that I've realized I've gotten from the stone. Sure, but her doing like the quote unquote legwork for the investigation was a lot, and then her being like, I have one last lead. it's a guy who says he's a Mayan who lives behind Empire Records in DC.
I saw
That's a super
the
comic
image
book.
on a flyer.
Yeah, I saw the image on a flyer.
Yeah.
That is by far
like,
the
what?
most. That is by far the most comic book ass introduction to a weird comic book ass scene, where he just has a tome
Yeah.
of Mayan history and predictions in ancient Mayan.
Yeah. Yeah, weird. Like again, the journey. It's Rise of Skywalker-esque a little bit.
Yeah, right.
In that, like, they just
Yeah.
kind of go to too many places. Like, cut out a few of those like interim stops. Like,
Egypt
you
would have been
could've-
an
you could have
awesome.
done away with some of that stuff.
Egypt would have been an awesome place to have the final act just being in Egypt, because Egypt's super cool and well connected to, like, as anybody who's played Assassin's Creed Origins knows, Greece and Egypt have a very deep historical connections to each other. Like, there were a lot of things that could have been done instead of it being like a borderline racist depiction of a Middle Eastern ruler.
Yeah, and that certainly speaks to some of the criticism I'd seen on the movie as well. And it's one of those things, like, I honestly, like, it was such a blink and you miss it thing that I didn't even like register as like overly problematic. But yeah, no, it's there, and that is an issue. And why, like, at the same time, it's like, but it's also like one guy being painted as like bad Egyptian, and he was, an oil, like an oil magnate kind of thing. So he was kind of bad to begin with, or whatever. Like,
Yeah,
I
but
don't
it's
know.
also, but like I
Um,
said, this really goes to and plays into the worst tropes of 80s films,
Yeah,
stuff that should be left in the 80s. I'm not saying it was on the level
Yeah.
of, say, shoot, what's his name? From 16 Candles. But it's bad.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Asian character or the Asian stereotype in 16
Yeah,
Candles.
which is not as bad
Um,
as, say, Mickey Rooney playing a Japanese man in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Like,
Yeah. But yeah, it still is like, okay, like, yeah, and none of that really added to Max's like arc.
No.
Like, you could have, I mean, like, the fact that the Saudi oil magnate that he goes to afterwards immediately all happens off screen. Like, you could have just had that whole sequence of things happen off screen. You could have jumped straight from him taking power from the guy that was going to try and like screw him and called him like a Ponzi scheme and all that stuff. You could have had him go straight from there to the White House, and not like, you would have lost the Cairo action sequence or the Egypt action sequence, which is why there is something there. But like, again, that could have been replaced with something else, I'm sure.
yeah.
But yeah.
Mhm.
What did you guys think of the Steve and Diana relationship? The fact that like Steve is effectively in this other person's body, and is kind of almost like he has to, like, I see it as mildly problematic in that, like, Diana gets weak for a man, and the man has to basically say like, no, you need to let me go. Like, that doesn't make for a strong character on her part of things, or as strong as I would have liked to see that character. I would have liked to have seen her make the choice to, like, without him kind of forcing it.
It's difficult because it's not just like, we've had an entire movie before this setting up that they really are star-crossed lovers, that they are deeply in love with each other, that her...
I mean, it's clearly set up that like this is a thing she's been pining for 70 years. So yeah, I get that,
Yeah.
like, she's not gonna want to like let that go overnight, but
like the idea
like,
of like the...
she
yeah.
can see the toll it's taking on her body and her powers and everything, and like, yeah, I think it's just I wish she had been more proactive in rescinding her wish, as opposed to like it taking Steve to really say like, you need to let me go.
I think it was less of a more of like, and I think this is comes back to what this crystal does. Like, what it does is it doesn't just grant your deepest wish. It really looks into your heart and sees what you want. Because it was like, oh, I want to be like Diana, but what she really wanted to be was like apex person, somebody who's dominant in everything that she does and everything that she's about. For Barbara, and when I think about Steve and Diana, Diana has been saving tomorrow, like saving the world tomorrow after Steve's death, because he's like, I can save today, but you can save the world.
I meant to mention that earlier. Really good that she like magically ended up hearing that line after all in the first movie, because that has become the turning point in 2 movies now.
Yeah.
that little bit of dialogue that Steve gave her, that she initially could not hear because of like the explosions in and around her head.
But I think that there is when Steve tells her she needs to let him go, it's more than you need to like let me go back to where I was and go back to the way things were before I left. It's more of a, you have not been able to let me go for 70 years.
Mm-hmm.
You lost me in a very tragic thing. We've had this wonderful second chance at exploring our feelings and knowing that they're true and that we do truly love each other. It's not just some wartime thing. It's not just some star-crossed lovers thing, so to speak, as like ships passing in the night, but rather like true soulmates. And knowing that should be enough comfort to let Steve go in a more fulfilling way than just that. As somebody who has like lost people, and recently almost losing somebody very, very close to me, it's hard. Like it's really hard to move on. You cling to things in a very desperate manner. That is definitely something that you could look at and say, well, that's weakness. Oh, she does, like she's weak because a man in her life, and I like on surface level, yeah, that is a problem. That is problematic. But I think if you really want to dig into the context, if you really want to talk about pain of loss and that ache that never really goes away, like that ghost, because even if the pain goes away, the ghost of that pain, that the ghost of that pain remains with you for a long time afterwards, to the point where all you can sometimes remember is that pain of what it was like to lose somebody. And if you dig into the context and you dig deeper than just the basic surface level, you understand why Diana is so fiercely dedicated towards preserving Steve at the cost of her own power. And it does take from the horse's mouth, so to speak, because anybody could tell Diana this, but would it really affect it? Diana telling herself that she needs to let go of Trevor to get her powers back, but to hear it from the person who's most who is at the center of it, who is basically saying, I've been giving the second shot at the rest of my life with you, and we do need to give that up. Hearing that from that person helps her refocus her moral center, and it does a lot, I think, in that moment. Sorry, somebody just knocked on my door, but it was probably one of the kids, and I'm going to ignore that. So, like, this is
I guess I hear what you're saying there.
But like on a surface level,
like
100%. The theme of it, not the theme of it, but like the basic level concept of it, yes.
Yeah, and from an execution stance, I would think she would still be much more reminiscent and missing home in Themyscira and like the people she lost there than this guy she knew for a few weeks in her like life as an immortal goddess kind of thing. It's they just don't do a great job of really kind of like, I guess, justifying the amount of hang up she has had on him compared to other aspects of her life that maybe could have been more resonant.
You mean those
in a way that doesn't just feel like that must have been some good D kind of thing.
Yeah.
Again, going back to that crudity. Frank, any other thoughts or any other ideas or parts of the movie you wanted to kind of bring up and touch on?
I think we've touched on it a little bit, but one of the things like that was just disappointing for me is just like most of the action sequences. I just don't think they were like very good even when they did them.
Mm-hmm.
Like even when they would do like that, like I think that Cairo or like the Egypt like car chase, I think is like one of the worst action parts of the movie. And that's why like if they did cut that out, I think it would be like a better movie. I just like I feel like they could have done more like with her, and I know she's like losing her powers for most of it. I just think they could have done more with her because especially like watching both of the movies back to back, like I feel like they, like I said before too, like I feel like they did better with her in the first movie, and like they do better action sequences with her, and like she's stronger, and like they just do better demonstrations of her, and like in that she's still like learning how to do things, like she's still just, this is her first outing in the world entirely, and here she's supposed to be like full powered, other even though she's losing her powers. But I'm just like I feel like that the scenes just like never had any weight, or like they were just boring a lot of the time.
Yeah, they like both that and the mall sequence almost seem set up to really hammer the point home that Diana saves children. Like
Yeah,
she goes out of her way, and if she sees children in trouble, that she will do what she can to save them. And you get a whole car chase in Egypt kind of that leads up to her saving two kids by like, you know, flying ahead. She lassos onto a rocket
That was
that
awesome.
that will get her there quicker, kind of thing.
I forgave the chase scene
Yeah,
entirely because of the rockets part.
Mm-hmm.
she had to save those dolls. She just had to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They're
yeah.
very, when she grabs them, those are very clearly dolls, and I get that's just a
Yeah.
production thing. But that was another thing for me with some of the action sequences where I'm like, oh, that's a doll, or like, oh, that's a person, and like it reminds me of watching a movie from the '80s, and like, and I don't think they intended it to
No.
be that way though.
But not in a
But
good
there
way.
was
Yeah,
definitely, yeah, like, but I just feel like I don't think they intended it. Some of the effects I just thought were a little bit bad, and like same thing with like the fact that you could tell sometimes that it was a doll, and like I guess I appreciate they were trying to keep things practical. I just was like, well, you could do it like better. People
Yeah.
do it better.
yeah.
So I was just one of those things where I'm like, that was just a thing for me at least.
And even on that note, there's this whole idea that like production wise, they've had time to keep working and polishing that stuff because yeah, a lot of the effects, especially with the lasso and like how she moves, I don't think is necessarily like a failing in the effects. I think it is like the decisions that they make in like
Mm.
she runs unnaturally and there's like a speed and quickness to her that doesn't and isn't supposed to look normal or isn't supposed to look
It's supposed to
right.
look more. It's supposed to look superhuman in a way, and I actually like that effect.
Yeah.
I felt that effect was cool, and they
Yeah.
didn't use it enough. I felt like when they showed her running like a normal person, it felt lacking than her kind of like supernatural, almost like she's moving, like on air rather than on ground, which I
Yeah.
liked about it. Um, in the regards to the action scene, I think that when it comes to like that's a problem. That's definitely a problem of post production. These like bad editing
Well,
scenes,
I was gonna say like
and they shouldn't. They like you said, they should
I
have
was gonna
had more
say
time to work. Like they had more time to work on it.
well they had more time to work on it, but at the same time they also probably saw the tea leaves and were like, well, we're not gonna make any money off this movie because we're not gonna be able to release it like internationally or globally or whatever. Like so why throw good money after bad? Let's just kind of it's good enough. It'll be fine. Let's just put it out
It's good enough
there,
for HBO Max,
and you know,
which
exactly,
worries me
like,
about
yeah,
what the
so,
hell the Snyder
I-
Cut is even gonna look like.
oh, good lord, yeah, that's gonna be a whole thing. Yeah, jeez, but like, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. The fact that like all the WB movies are coming to to HBO Max next year, and we're gonna get this kind of experience day and date for their whole slate. Gonna be very
They
interesting.
better not fuck up Dune.
But yeah,
They better
like
not fuck
that.
up Dune.
That was definitely something I was thinking about as I was like looking and being like, oh, I didn't like how that looked. I was like, well, yeah, they had more time, but also were they going to put more money into it? No, they didn't need to put more money into it because there was never going to be a return on that investment. So, it was it's good enough kind of mentality, and I can appreciate that. You know, in a global pandemic, deal with it. But yeah, I agree, Frank, that I didn't think really any of the. I guess the White House action sequence is probably my favorite
Yeah, I agree.
of the
Yeah.
movie. And because also then you get to the fight between Diana and Cheetah, and that has its own mess of like CG issues and kind of stuff.
Their first fight scene
So
in the
yeah,
White House I thought was
and
awesome. The second one on
yeah,
was not that
exactly.
great.
When she is like CG
Yeah.
Cheetah and she has become the apex predator, I was like, I feel like, did you really need to go that far with the character? Like, yes, we see how far Barbara has fallen or whatever, but I feel like we didn't need to see how far she had fallen. Like, we got the idea. You could have kept it grounded, so to speak, as opposed to going full on into the supernaturalness of it.
When she makes that comment earlier about animal print, rawr, like that's so in and like that's so fresh. Have her outfit be the quote unquote cheetah outfit, sure, but she in the White House sequence, I thought Kristen Wiig looked awesome. She was competent. Their fighting was like, okay, Max, Steve, security guards, out of the way. This is where the real fighting is happening. And when they start, like, Diana gets tossed through a pillar. She tries using the bracelet thing, and it doesn't like work on. Like, she's lost it, so she can't like do a real big push. And like Barbara's just able to just be like, guess what? Nope. Like, that's awesome stuff happening. It's practical. It's good fight choreography for in a very small space. They're really using it well, I felt. And then, but at the same time, they're dealing with like bullets coming at them from the White House security firing on them. It's like I really enjoyed that entire White House action sequence. It's probably the highlight for me of the film, action-wise. One thing I will say is that another thing, less action-wise and more just very cool. I like the way that Patty Jenkins handles flight. If that makes any sense. Like the flying sequences, I always felt were like really solid. Whether it was when she was in the armor or she was in the invisible jet, and even at the very end where she's like clearly like gliding on something. So it wasn't just Superman like, oh, going forward. It felt like she was moving with something. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I think that those aspects were very good. I know those aren't quote unquote considered quote unquote action sequences, but I liked them.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because I now hear that feedback in the context of her announcement for the Rogue Squadron movie, that teaser trailer thing where she basically talked about growing up, at the tarmac because her dad was a pilot and she's loved flight kind of all along, and so yeah, she probably has a very particular view of flight because of that relationship to it, and it, like if anything, it makes me more excited for Rogue Squadron when we eventually get that. So yeah, I think that's going to be hopefully a cool movie as well. Last little thing I want to touch on is the wonderful Linda Carter Easter egg, having the original Wonder Woman there, original live action Wonder Woman, kind of get her mid-credits tease as Asteria, who, as you kind of touched on earlier, Cam, gets introduced in the new magic power of the lasso sequence that kind of shows, and we only see her like in the armor. We like get a glimpse.
You
of
know
her
it's
eyes
Linda
or something
Carter
like
though.
that.
Like she just looks so iconic.
I did not.
Oh really? I picked up on it right away. I was like, that's Linda Carter. Holy shit.
Yeah. No, I did not catch that at all. So like when you see a Wonder Woman-esque character walking around in blue in that post-credit sequence, I was like, oh, like is this setting up where Gal Gadot is going to be in whatever Wonder Woman 3 is, and then she turns around and it was her. I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like that is Asteria. She's been doing this a long time, and she's out there still helping the world. I thought was a very wonderful little moment, and of course a great little Easter egg for, again, fans of Wonder Woman in general, and especially fans of kind of the live action and one of the most iconic interpretations certainly of Wonder Woman prior to Gal Gadot.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a great little Easter egg. I did not see that, in that early sequence. Admittedly, because I don't know Linda Carter's eyes,
It's
as
just
well
like her
apparently.
brow to her nose,
Um,
like her nose line. I don't know. Like I
mhm.
saw it and I was like, is that Linda Carter? I was like, oh man, I bet that's Linda Carter. And sure enough, question I have for you guys at that very end scene: was it CGI or
Yeah,
bad plastic surgery?
I'm not
No,
gonna like weigh in
that's
on
fair.
that
I thought it
because
was CGI.
I think
So
I yeah I think she has tried to maintain her youthful look over the years, and I didn't think one way or the other of it.
I thought she looked good.
And that was it was interesting because Jessica Chobot obviously gets a lot of comparisons to her. So honestly, like when I saw the eyes, that was probably who I thought. I was like, oh, did they get Chobot in
Oh,
for
that would
like
have been
a
cool
little
though.
cameo? That'd
That
be
would have been
neat.
really cool.
Um, but yeah, the fact that they brought Linda in for that was a great little nod. And I think a very just fitting little way to end the movie. Any final thoughts you guys want to touch on or share before we wrap up? I will take your silence as a no.
No, I have one.
All
I
right.
have one final thing I want to say.
Okay.
Um, while I do think that this movie is bloated, has several problems, I still really do enjoy. Um, I do enjoy the fact that we're living in an era and age where we are getting a Wonder Woman feature film, uh,
Mm-hmm.
which is she's one of the Trinity, the big three of DC Comics. She has always been a staple for really wonderful comic book moments. Her character has taken some very interesting turns and stances that are in comic book wise are very notable and very iconic. And I think that she as a character has stood the test of time, without a doubt. And for us to be getting this, I would love to see a. Uh, I can't wait to see where they go with her in the third film. I hope that it is like the people who put it together are able to kind of like break this streak of a bad third act. Um, but overall, I still think that this is a movie like worth watching, and it's certainly not the worst film that's ever been made, as some people are like blasting it as being.
Not by far.
Yeah,
It's not
that's
the worst movie I've seen this week.
there you go. Yeah, I like that's kind of where I land too. Is like it there's a lot of bad about that movie, but there's plenty of good in it too. And yeah, it's nowhere near the worst things I've seen this year. Um, so yeah, I implore anybody to, especially if you liked the first movie, like because again, a lot of those performances are there and are still great. And then it adds in a couple great new performances from Kristen Wiig and Pedro Pascal as well. Yeah, lots of good stuff there. Any final thought there from you, Frank?
Do you think Pedro Pascal will come back in like a future film or anything else in the DC universe? Do you think they're pretty much just done with him and his character?
I I mean, since his whole, as I understand it, like his whole thing from the comics is kind of being able to make those wishes come true.
Uh,
Like if he doesn't still have that power, he renounced that wish. Then I don't
Mm.
know if there's a reason to bring him back. So I don't
so
think it will.
in
I think it'll be like a
Yeah, I
one
think
and
it's a
done
one and
kind of
done
thing.
thing. Max Lord in the comic books is a drastically different character. He was the liaison from the government to the Justice League. He was featured prominently as a character for a lot of the um, as kind of like the organizational head of the Justice League, so to speak. So you have like the figureheads and the JLA members. Um, but then you have like who is the person who actually has been running the program and is in charge of it is Max Lord, and eventually Max Lord uh, is revealed to like be a basically part of a plot to uh, like this was a plot to lure superheroes into trusting the government, and um, he ends up betraying them. He accesses so Batman, it's a long story arc. We don't have time for it.
We don't need to head
We
down
don't have
into
to have
that.
time for it, but it
Yeah.
ends with Wonder Woman snapping Max Lord's neck.
Okay. Sure. And then I'm sure he comes back because they
No,
always do.
well, they knew 52 the universe, so kind of in a way.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I don't think he'll be back. I like the bigger thing, honestly, for me is like, as much as I would love to see Chris Pine back, I hope they don't
Agreed.
bring him back. But I also don't know what a Steve Trevor less Wonder Woman movie looks like. So that's kind of like the big unknown for me is what is her next? Does she find somebody new out there that kind of helps fill that role for her, or
I hope not. I hope
is she just gonna be out there? Yeah, and I'm not saying that she needs to or anything like that. And again, if they could do it in a way that like this other person it serves as a good companion to her even without any kind of like romantic relationship. Just I want there to be someone for her to kind of have that human connection with, in whatever capacity it is. But yeah, so that's the big thing for me was I don't know what this version of Wonder Woman looks like without Steve Trevor, because he has been such an integral part to kind of her humanity, I guess. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, like I it's the kind of thing I imagine we'll get a sequence of like her thinking about him, and he comes in, does a cameo, and like tells her what she needs to hear in a given moment or something like that. But it's just her telling herself what she needs to hear.
I don't even think you never need to bring him
who
back.
knows?
I think his
We'll see.
send-off in this film was perfect enough to be like a final send-off for good. I would love to see it be I would love to see it where, I thought Barbara was a phenomenal example of a, like, wonderful platonic friend. And that could definitely push into the realm of, like, do they bring Barbara back? Because technically Barbara really didn't commit any crimes outside of, assaulting White House security. But,
Yeah.
nobody remembers that because it was...
and nearly killing that drunk guy.
That's a
the other
service.
thing,
That's
is,
a
like,
service
I
to
don't-
society right there.
Like everybody rescinds their wish or whatever, but like the events of the movie still happen. So like it seems like people still have a memory of things, right? So
That's unclear.
like, yeah, it's a
I guess it's just you remember it happened, but then like it didn't happen. Like it whatever happens like is undone, but you remember that it did happen, but
Yeah.
it just is like undone after the
I
fact.
don't know.
like it's like time didn't reverse, like because the way they show it is like, oh, missiles just start disappearing again, and stuff like that. Like we don't so those days of like just the world being in chaos happened, which again is a weird thing that like we don't like, that nobody remembers from the 80s. Remember that weird day in the 80s where everything went nuts? Yeah, like so that's again weird things that like the movie got into so complicated that maybe it didn't need to do. And again, dusting off that old trope of the Cold War stuff of like we just need more missiles. But yeah, I'll be interested to see where they go, and I'll certainly be happy to go see it day one. Hopefully, back in theaters, safe and sound, in a few years' time. So yeah, that's going to do it, I think, for our thoughts here on Wonder Woman 1984. Yeah, that's thank you guys for sitting down talking to me about that, because it's definitely a conversation I didn't want to wade into on Twitter, just
That's fair.
because I hate these kinds of things on Twitter where it's just like, okay, everybody throw out their hottest takes. 280 characters is your limit, and then like there's no way to have a dialogue back and forth about this kind of stuff. So having a chance to sit down and talk to you guys about it, where we could air our grievances, but also maybe celebrate some of the cool things the movie did, was a nice way to spend an hour and change on this Sunday evening. So yeah, that's going to wrap up this episode. Thank you guys for joining me. Let's go around the metaphorical table with any plugs we might have. You can follow Cameron at Rev Cabot. Anything you want to give a shout out to,
Yeah, we're
Cam?
coming up on the end of December. You guys should all be looking for our, at least the gaming side of That Nerdy Site's editors, our top list of top 10s of this last year. Last year we had a whole smorgasbord of them. I'm looking forward to seeing what we end up putting out this year. This year, of course, is a hotly contested gaming year, filled with incredible games and some not so incredible games, but we'll definitely be able to get into that in our lists. So keep an eye out for our top 10 lists going forward. And since Trevor's been on a video kick, we're probably going to be doing some video stuff about that as well.
We will see, certainly, yeah. You can follow Frank at Irrelevant Jokes. Anything you want to give a shout out to, Frank?
I guess it's probably a little bit like irrelevant now, but we did do our whole month of the D plus shows for Christmas. We're post Christmas now, but I thought those were some good episodes and some quality movies that I think a lot of us were nostalgic about. So I still think it's a good time for people to check out.
Yeah, you can stay in the Christmas spirit a little bit longer if you want to go check out those episodes. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey on Twitter. I am, speaking of our top 10s, I sat down and recorded yesterday now, I guess, with our friend Harold over at H-Bomb and Friends. I sat down and talked through my top 10 as it currently sits. I'm still hoping to squeeze in a couple more games that might, shake up the list a little bit. But I sat down and did a top 10 list with him in podcast form. So, and that's, I believe, going to go out the same day as this episode. So you can check my Twitter. I'm sure I'll be retweeting when he posts the link and stuff. So you can check that out. But yeah, other than that, keep it locked to That Nerdy Site for all of our upcoming 2020 best of kind of coverage. Don't know if we'll have it might be kind of like just video games this time around, especially because a large portion of our film team left the site this year. But and also films were a really tough thing to do this year, so we might not have necessarily top 10s, but keep an eye out for anything we might be doing here in the month of January for our best of 2020 wrap-up stuff. And yeah, you can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site. And as I said, if you liked what you heard, please rate, review, subscribe, like, share, all that fun stuff, and maybe even consider supporting us over at Patreon, patreon.com/thatnerdysite, where every patron gets early access to a monthly bonus episode of this very show. This month's early access episode that you can still get for the next few days is, which one is this? This is us talking about Forgotten Gems. Feels like a lifetime ago that we recorded that one. Forgotten Gems of the Last Generation of Gaming. So you can hear kind of the three of us and Logan all sitting down talking about some of that stuff. And then, yeah, we have another episode, early access episode going up here at the end of December that we will have to figure out here in the next couple days what that's going to be about. It might just be a big old like FU 2020 send-off. Who knows? But thank you again, guys, for sitting down talking Wonder Woman with me. Thank you, audience, for listening. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.